Tonight it's all about orbs. That's right. Are they ghostly phenomena or something completely mundane, boring, and explainable? We dive into that and more on this episode of Curious Explorers.
If you're saying, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that unexplained thing because it's not huge, you're kind of just as guilty as saying, I'm going to accept this unexplained thing without, questioning it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Curious Explorers. I'm here with my fabulous co-host and proprietress of the Paranormal Museum and Bookstore in amazing Asbury Park, the Kathy A. Kelly. I'm Traci Stein. Welcome.
Well, it's good to see you. It's been a while.
I know. It's so good to see you, Kathy. And I'm so excited to talk with you about our topic today.
Yeah, I think this is a topic that it comes up a lot more often than people probably are, you know, probably admit. And I think it's something that people go back and forth on. So I think people fall on one side versus the other, but I think they get wishy-washy too.
So people are probably like, well, what is the topic? And the topic is orbs, right? What are they? What aren't they? I guess this can be a really polarizing topic. I wasn't aware of how angry people could get about
Mhm.
the topic of orbs. So do you want me to ask questions or do you want to kind of tell me a little bit about an overview of orbs?
Well, I think that orbs are controversial in the paranormal community, specifically in the investigative part of it. So, specifically with people who are going out and capturing what they consider to be evidence of paranormal energy, and I think that they're controversial because they're very personal, right? When you capture an orb, you tend to lean on one side of the argument than when somebody else captures an orb. And I think that investigators sometimes become frustrated because because I think orbs can be very easy to dismiss. And I think a lot of times when they're not dismissed by other investigators, people get frustrated because it minimizes it just becomes very, very easy for an investigator to then be kind of ridiculed or dismissed because they're accepting that as evidence. I will say orbs became uh, really, really important in the paranormal community in the late 90s. And I would say that they stayed very important until the early 2000s, the early to mid, aughts. And I would say now, most people who would consider themselves to be serious investigators, not necessarily, I don't mean physicists and people like that, but I mean serious kind of hobbyists. And please don't be offended by my use of the word hobbyist, but serious amateur investigators would it would be very unlikely for them to present any evidence that included orbs as evidence. It doesn't mean that they necessarily don't accept it themselves personally, but they would be very reluctant to move forward with orbs as evidence, and certainly not as the only evidence.
So I'm going to tell you something you may not even know. And certainly no one listening will yet know, I don't think. But so it- my one of my majors in college was illustration photography. So I don't consider myself a photography expert, but I am aware that, people for a long time have been saying, well, orbs are really just it's anything from lens flare to dust, light anomalies of some sort, but that are not paranormal in nature. And I get what people are saying. I mean, back in the day, it could even be like something on the negative way
Mhm.
back in the day. But I have to tell you, and I know it's like personal experience is like considered the least convincing data, but I have seen orbs on old school film back in the day and on, you know, digital cameras and so forth. And the iPhone and so forth. I'm going on and on about that. I'll have to I have seen orbs show up both on old school film and when using like my phone as a camera. around things that if you were to believe they were evidence of spirit or haunting activity or just some paranormal phenomena, there would be a reason why you would see them there and then. And I can talk more about that in a minute. But do you know what I mean? And
I mean, I think the caveat to that for investigators is number one, the orb phenomena really coincided with digital photography. So you did not see a ton of orbs on film. And when you did, it was interesting, but they were more like light anomalies than actual orb anomalies, unless you're talking about motion pictures. And then you had in the mid 90s, you had this new technology that came out, which were like the 1 megapixel digital cameras that came out. And you started to notice exclusively from in the beginning, exclusively from the paranormal community, that they would be going to places and they were taking pictures not to capture orbs, they were taking pictures to capture apparitions. And they weren't expecting to see orbs, they weren't expecting to see light anomalies, they wanted to see a body. And they were collecting this data and they were starting to notice, well, we're going to these haunted locations and this phenomena is happening. And of course it was happening because it was happening pretty much everywhere, but they were only taking their pictures at purportedly haunted locations. So I would say that if you had orbs on film or on negatives, those would likely be of much more interest to someone than from a from digital perspective. And I do think that I think that I think that there's an argument to be made that, you know, plasma orbs do exist, right? We know that. We know that there are these things, they're part of nature, they're free floating kind of energy. They're useful. If you believe in spirits, they would be useful for spirits to be able to use. If you believe in telekinesis or you believe in any of those things, it would be useful for someone to be able to use. And so they do exist. So the idea that there are some orbs that become visible on film or become visible on digital photography that are of, if not a paranormal nature, then certainly of, I would say, a super normal nature. I think that being said, there is lots of evidence of artifacts and lens flare less, more with digital photography that you see flaws in the actual creation of the image, the digital image. So the digital image is not being recorded directly onto a piece of film, right? It's being interpreted and then being put into data. And so I think you see a lot of that. And I think the hard thing about orbs is that you do throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to orbs, because there's so many things that it could be that it's very difficult to take that, especially if it's someone else's evidence. You know, if it's your own evidence and it's for your own edification and it's for your own kind of personal, journey, people will take that evidence. I know lots of investigators who are hardcore people who are like, orbs don't mean anything, but will say to me, but let me show you this because it's with their experience. But yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, if you've seen orbs on film, that's interesting because it very rarely happened. And that was one of the things that when people started to look at orbs more closely, that they started to realize was, if this is happening on digital, if this is happening so it's so prevalent, why is it only prevalent with digital photography? And that's where you started having engineers and different people jumping in and saying, listen, I can absolutely explain this. Which is not to say that you can explain every single one of them that way. It's just that there's so many other things that it could be that I think most investigators are not equipped to determine, one or the other. And it's really hard to throw out evidence that you love.
I feel like a fifth grader, not to graders at all, because I'm like, ooh, I want to like tell you my stories though. So believe it or not, back in the day, and I no longer have those photos and I don't think I could get them back, but I'm going to say probably like maybe it was 1999 or 2000. And I was using disposable cameras. And
Right.
we had bought an apartment that we had to actually make into an apartment. It was the ground floor, and it was before we lived there. It was
Hmm.
in a brick row house that was built in the 1800s, and it was a US post office. It had been a little grocery store, and it
Right.
had been a real estate office before we bought it and gutted it and converted it into an apartment. Now, I took photos inside just to remember it and decide what we're gonna do, and outside. And that again and again and again and again, orbs, like lots of them. And I could see
Hmm.
somebody, well, it's dust. But is it dust when you're photographing, what it was the parking lot at the time and you're like across the street? Or you know what I mean? It was just so
Yeah,
often.
I mean, I
I'll
think
tell you
that
why
there's
this place. Not only because it was a million weird places, but the person who had owned the real estate office had, maybe a year before been killed in a tragic car accident while on vacation.
Mhm.
So, I used to like be like talking to him. I had, a psychic I didn't know come and clear the apartment. We would hear and see weird stuff in the apartment. People would tell me they didn't feel comfortable in an area, not knowing anything about the history. So to me,
Mhm.
orbs made sense there. I
Right.
actually gave the photos to his wife, back then. I will never get them back. Um,
Right.
so I could just be lying, but I'm not.
I know, and I don't think that you are. I would say disposable cameras and the smaller other cameras were also very likely to have these types of anomalies. This is a perfect case of why this is a difficult a difficult subject in the field. And the reason is that when people find evidence of what they suspect to have happened, there's an emotional attachment to it, right? So it's like all of these things happened. I felt like the place was haunted, and then I got this, and I finally have this tangible thing, right, that I can show people and be like, wow, and I don't want to be the person walking into you and saying, no, it's dust, because everything that you say may be true. It may be haunted. It may be a spirit. It may be all of those things. And also, it may be dust on that film. So to me, I always say, it's not my place to tell you, right? I'll let you decide for yourself. In most cases, I would say that this was dust. However, given all of the other things that you're saying, if you want to accept this as evidence of what you're already feeling, I understand that it might be. Um, However, I would say this: I've also taken pictures in places where there should be no, there's no spirit activity, there's no spirit evidence, or there's nothing like that, and gotten orbs, right? And the reason is that at the very least, it's true that orbs are artifacts. It's true that orbs are dust. It's true that orbs are moisture in the air. It's true that orbs are this. They may also be evidence of paranormal activity. I just think that it's kind of like accepting mediumship, right? If you believe it, you accept it. If you don't, you don't, you know? And I think that from an investigative standpoint, when people and look, this is one of the reasons why I don't present evidence. You and I have this conversation all the time
Absolutely.
about why I don't put evidence out there. And the reason is that it's not my job to convince anybody of the proof of what I experience, or let's just say it's not a job I take on anymore. I used to. I don't
No,
take it on anymore.
we will do it here and there,
Well,
even
no, I mean, I will present stuff that I find really interesting. But what I mean is that when I go out to investigate, if I go out to investigate for a person, I present the evidence to that person. I don't generally present it to the public and say, hey, you know what? Mrs. Miller's house is haunted. Um, but because 9 times out of 10, the people who are concerned with it are going to believe it, and everybody else is going to pretty much attack you for it. So, and honestly, I don't care if we get attacked or not. Like I said, I don't care either way whether we get attacked or not, because we're here asking questions, and that's part of asking questions. But I think from most investigators' standpoints, when they get orbs, they'll take them for themselves, but they won't present them. And it's largely because of what you just said, where you said, I went to a place. So I'm going to tell you why this orb is not a light anomaly. I'm going to tell you why it's not moisture. I'm going to tell you why it's not a bug, because this is where Mrs. Miller's grandmother died. And this is where blah, blah, and so you have this laundry list, and this is the physical thing I get to show you that all of that, which I cannot prove,
And it's not,
is true.
it's
It's
the
not tangible.
can't
And that's it.
feeling up my back or the shadow.
Exactly. Now, you did say one thing that I do take umbrage with, and that is where you said that.
No.
Yeah, I'm going to come at you now. Where you said personal experiences are the least. That is not the case for me. I actually find personal experiences to be the most compelling evidence.
Right.
And the reason is,
Generally, for people who are
right,
like, it doesn't convince.
I will tell you when it's their personal experience or it's the personal experience of someone that they know in a place that they know, they find it the most compelling as well. And after doing this for 35 years, I have come to the conclusion that you know your place better than I do. And if you're sharing this with me, I am going to say I lean in to what your experiences have been. We may continue to talk about it, and I may be like, oh, she's a lunatic. She's out there. But that's very unlikely. If you're coming to me and we're talking about it and you're telling me you're having these experiences, I am going to be far more likely to take that place seriously as a place with potential paranormal activity because of your experiences. And I don't mean like as other investigators. A lot of times I get called out to do places and I'll get called out with other investigators who want to they're excited to present something to me. But I mean, someone that lives there day in, day out, or someone that experiences things day in and day out, that are their only kind of commitment to the location is their commitment to the location. It's their home, it's their family thing, it's their this. I take that very seriously. And I do think that a sense of presence and I think a sense of presence and I think that feeling of when you're not alone are, number one, they're the most commonly reported paranormal activity that there is. And number two, I think that to me is the most compelling paranormal because people don't feel comfortable sharing that. It's not something they're like, I know there's no evidence. I mean, I remember doing an investigation where it was this elderly couple, and the last thing on the planet that they wanted was for me to come in, or for anyone to think that they thought that their place was haunted. And they were like, finally, we had to have you come in here because we cannot explain it in any other way. And, it was one of the rare cases where I was like, hey, your house is haunted. And Tracy, you've known me for how many years? How often have I said that? 5 times in all of those years.
I know.
So I do think that when you're talking about orbs, I think orbs become a very personal thing. And I think that when orbs are in support of your experience, you accept them. But when orbs are used in support of somebody else's experience, most people in the field absolutely won't. And there's a phrase which is when in doubt, throw it out. And with orbs, there's always going to be that doubt. I don't actually cotton to that, right? Because I don't know, like if it had meaning to you and you live there and all of those criterion are met, I'm okay with people saying it's part of their paranormal experience. It might not be something I accept for my own personal, but I'm okay accepting it for other people's.
And I mean, and I appreciate that. And I think most people would appreciate that because I agree with you. The things that people experience, and especially if they've happened more than once and they know themselves and they know that they're not, hearing or seeing these specific things all the time or feeling them, it is compelling in a different
Mhm.
way. I just meant, somebody online, 1,000 people online might be like, well, you know, that's not proving anything to me.
Yeah, it was the cat. It was the wind. It was, there's also this big belief that because it could be something else,
That it
it
is.
can't be paranormal.
Right.
And I absolutely don't believe it. I absolutely don't follow that. That is an irrational argument as far as I'm concerned.
So I'm going to tell you what started me on this topic and saying, "Oh, I really want to talk about orbs with Kathy," because A, I knew that you have a lot more experience in this field, understatement, and I knew you had specific thoughts and feelings about this, grounded in knowledge, and I appreciate that. I was watching one of the many paranormal TV shows I really enjoy watching. I'm just outing myself all over these days, but I was cracking up, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm watching, stuff caught on film, clearly a humanoid shadow figure passing across somebody's path. And there are orbs. There's like a burst of orbs before this. Everybody's commenting on the shadow figure and not the orbs. The doll is turning its head in the chair, and there's like a bunch of light anomalies there. I'm like, all right, it's kind of weird that nobody's pointing that out, and I get why. What's another one? Like, furniture moving across a room, and there are these obvious orb-like phenomena that are visible. And I was saying to myself, like, God, everybody's making a point to not point out that as these other very noticeable and compelling, possibly phenomena are occurring, so are the orbs. Now I want to tell you an orb story.
Okay.
Am I driving you crazy with these orb
No,
stories?
no, I just have an answer to that. I just have something to that because I have cameras on in the museum all the time, right? 24/7. And I get excited when I see an orb, right? Because I don't see them all the time, right? So it's like I'm running 24/7 and then all of a sudden, there's an orb and there hasn't been one for 6 months. So I look at something like that and I'm like, well, if it was the heat, if it was dust, if it was this, it would happen more consistently. But I would say that in those particular cases that you're talking about, a lot of these areas really are dusty and dirty, and
To go,
and also the low quality of night vision cameras are, they do make it more likely that you have those kind of reflective moments.
as the
um
head is turning.
yeah, well, but also like, I do kind of think I remember that particular, that episode. It also depends on whether or not there's someone in the room, because there's a lot of things that can cause that kind of movement. Um, and I think that most people on those well, not to get into who's on the show, who's not on the show, but they don't do a whole lot of tearing it apart, right? They're not very skeptical when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I would say you're probably right, where when they see orbs, they don't consider them paranormal. So they're not going to address them. They're going to look at that and say, it's a dusty place. I see dust. I see light anomalies. So to them, there's a couple of there are a couple of very well known paranormal television personalities who do lean in to orbs when it's, when it works for them. But I would say you're right. I think that most people would just, they don't even see them. That there's so much not a part of the conversation for them. And I would say if a doll's moving its head, I wouldn't be worried about orbs either. But if a doll's moving its head, I'm running out. But I do agree with your point where they had, like I said, that baby is gone with that bathwater. They're not taking them seriously. And I would say if a new technology came up, right, another form of visual technology, maybe some kind of thermal, some kind of electromagnetic, some kind of device that's going to record them, that's not the existing technology, where they could be isolated and they could be better kind of codified. I think people would take them seriously. I just think now you know they're so difficult to determine what's what. I mean, there is something called the Orb Project, which
Oh, wow.
you guys can Google, and they've done an enormous a lot of work. They've done a lot of work on showing you what different types of environmental and electronic orbs look like. Um, but like I said, I think paranormal orbs are rare, and unfortunately, I do think they get thrown out, with the others because of they're just too easy to it's just too easy to be deceived by the environmental ones.
So that said, I am going to include the clip from our trip to
Hmm.
Gettysburg. And a little backstory for people, we stayed at the Gettysburg Hotel. We had had a reservation in a more haunted place. And because of snowstorm, that place closed down. Gettysburg Hotel still haunted. Thankfully, not my room, which I was so glad about. But the next day, we spoke to, one of the hotel staff who said, these rooms are considered haunted, and he had had quite significant experiences elsewhere where we weren't permitted to go. But anyway, Kathy and I, remember Kathy, went to the ballroom and we went into the vault, both of which are reported to be haunted. I went in before you, you came in for a little bit, I videotaped you or recorded you, and then you left and I stayed in there for a few minutes. Now, what I have on what I recorded with my phone, I actually think it's more than just dust. I'll tell you why, despite it being an old, possibly dusty ballroom. So, two things. One, I'm in there for a few minutes and I'm just kind of talking in case anybody's here, let me know. On the screen of my phone, I can see there are no lights on, and I can see lots of things that look very clearly to me like orbs. Okay, I couldn't see them with my eyes, but I could see them in real time. And I comment on that. And I'm saying, all right, that's interesting. But if you're really here, pretty much you need to kind of do something more than that. And as I'm looking at the screen, instead of this semi random pattern, one large one appears to respond to what I'm just saying and move right towards me in the camera. Last chance. Holy cow. So that to me seemed possibly intelligent. The other thing is, and I mentioned this to you, when I was there probably 10 minutes total. I heard this incredibly annoying, loud whistling the entire time in an empty ballroom. So I'm thinking there's got to be an employee somewhere right outside a door, not behind me where I came in, maybe at the far end, and the loudest whistler ever. Why is whistling only enjoyable to the whistler? I was like, I wish this person would stop whistling. But it was so loud and distracting. When I looked at the video, it's barely audible,
Mhm.
which I find weird that this light anomaly seems to get large and respond to my comment and come toward me. And there's this annoying whistling that isn't really recorded as this loud, annoying whistling. So let's see what people think. I don't know if you had thoughts about it. I know you saw the video again. I'm sure there's more compelling evidence out there, but I thought it was responding to me.
Well, I think, this is one of those areas that you tread lightly, right? For me, at least, because my first inclination would be dusty ballroom, you know, air conditioning kicked on, or actually heat, or whatever. As an investigator, I would want to look at things much more. I would want to set up a camera, see when things moved in that direction, and and whatnot. I would also say, well, did the orb stay solid the entire time? Was it reflecting light? Was it emanating light? Because usually, when you're looking at whether or not something's a paranormal, you look at it and you say, um, does it emit light and not reflect light? Does it retain its shape? Like, in other words, does it not, become long or flat or whatever? And is it in a place that has a reputation for being haunted? Um, that being said, I go back to my earlier answer, which is I leave it to you. And the reason is I wasn't there. I didn't feel the spark of this or the spark of that. And because you were trying to elicit a response and you seem to have gotten a response, to me, I would accept this. And I'm going to make a real clarification here, a real thing. I would accept this as evidence, not as proof. And for me, that's what all investigation is. It's evidence, not proof. And eventually, what you do is you keep compiling evidence in both sides until you reach a tipping point. And for me, I would accept that as evidence of you having had a paranormal experience. Not every paranormal experience is poltergeist. Not every paranormal experience is Amityville. And in fact, most paranormal experiences are subtle. And to me, 35 years in, that's what I would accept. Now, would I present that as evidence of a paranormal experience. No,
Okay.
right? But I do accept it as evidence of a paranormal experience for you. And to be quite honest with you, I might accept it personally as a paranormal experience for myself. But I think that it's well, you know what it's like in any profession. You know what I mean? You have standards that are your personal standards and then standards that are peer review standards, right? So you're like, listen, I'll accept that, but I'm not putting it up there and putting my reputation on it because I know it's going to get torn apart. And I will say, I think there'll probably be viewers and listeners who are like, I kind of feel like Tracy feels on this. You know what I mean? Where I have this on my phone and I accept it as this. And then there will be people who will jump on my side of it, which they'll say, yeah, you know, I get what she's saying, but you can't put yourself out there with that. And that's literally what you and I have said to each other, you know, but I think that's probably the case with most evidence. It all has to be, you have to vet it personally, you know. I will say, I take a look at the orbs on the, it's a great poster. They have this great they have this great thing that'll really show you, because there's a lot of stuff that you're like, that doesn't look like this or that doesn't look like that, but it's really cool. They'll show you this is what a moth looks like when it's reflected in, and you're like, oh, that does look like a fairy or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think the orb controversy, it's it's very illustrative of, I think, the the nuances of paranormal, right? It to where paranormal drafts on the normal. It's very, very close. And so you have to be discerning, and you have to, it's not these big wow moments. It's these very, very subtle things. And it's so easy to dismiss people because it's not these big wow moments. But the fact is when you dismiss these little subtleties, you're just as kind of guilty as someone who just buys immediately. You know, if you're saying, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that unexplained thing because it's not huge, you're kind of just as guilty as saying, I'm going to accept this unexplained thing without, you know, questioning it. So I look at that, and while, like I said, while it's not something that I might accept as proof, I don't have a problem with people looking at it as evidence.
So the big reaction I'm having right now is I can't tell you how I wish a giant orb would just film as we're talking about it, like right here. But alas,
Paranormal doesn't work that way,
sometimes
sadly.
it does. I actually have a
Sometimes it
story
does.
about that,
I
but
mean, the
I'll tell you another
synchronicity, you know,
time.
I mean, Carl Jung, right? I mean, Carl Jung coined synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. And to me, there's just a lot of interest. There's a lot of things. So to me, there's a bunch of different theories as to what orbs actually are as well. So to me, if you want to accept that orbs have a place in the paranormal world, what makes the most sense to me is that they are free floating energy, that they are not spirits, they are free floating energy, that spirits pull to them to be able to manifest other phenomena. Because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that they are spirits. It does make sense to me, kind of the way it makes sense that, you know, something might draw moisture out of the air. You know, they might draw energy out, and that those are the manifestation of the energy being drawn. Um, you know, I'm not sure how you prove that. I'm not sure how I mean, I guess a Faraday cage and some sort of thing like that would work. But because it's incredibly difficult to put free floating paranormal phenomena into a laboratory and have it be repeatable, we're just going to have to keep respecting each other and listening to each other and seeing what the correlations are between the different experiences that we have, which I think it would be awesome if that happened in the paranormal field. It would be awesome if that happened everywhere, to be quite honest with you.
Mhm.
But yeah, yeah. So I think they're controversial, um, but only because people lean in too hard on both sides.
If I ever find the additional photos for my other anecdotes that, of course, to me are extremely convincing, I we will post them. But in the meanwhile, I'm hoping people will let us know. So what do you think orbs are? Do you have experience with them? Whatever your position is, why do you think that? Um, and what else would you like to hear about from us? What else should we cover? Let
I
us know.
would also love to see your orb photographs, and
Yeah.
I would love to see any kind of photographic evidence that you might have. Um, but to Tracy's point, when there's other phenomena, we kind of discard the orbs. So I'd like to see all of that. You know, I'd like to see and hear all of your stories. I would also like to see if you have stories that are not related to haunted locations. You know, where you took orbs and then where you got photographs of orbs and then found out something versus the other way. Like I said, I find personal experiences to be incredibly compelling.
If I find the photos, we will do a little quick update and I will tell you about an orb laden thing where I found out later why there could be 1,000 orbs.
I will tell you, I have a million pictures of orbs, so I will forward them to Tracy in almost every haunted location on the planet, but I will forward them to Tracy and she can pick and choose. I also do have some orb video that I from here that,
Awesome.
like I said, I don't present it as evidence, but I accept it as evidence. So I'll send that out and you can post that as well.
Yeah, we'll include those in the video as we get them, or we'll do a separate one.
Yeah.
Anything else that we should cover before we wrap up the orb chat for today?
I don't think so. I think I mean, I think orbs are really interesting because they're polarizing. And I think they're really interesting because they're also really, really personal. And one of the things that I think people don't ever really realize about the study of the paranormal is that it all comes from a very personal place. And I think it's very easy for everyone to be dismissive of other people's experiences until they look at why they're interested in the paranormal themselves. And it almost always comes from um, a personal experience or loss or trying to understand um, something outside the realm of what we would consider common. And so, I think orbs unfortunately are on the outs right now, but I don't think we need to be I don't think we need to to draw such a hard line when it comes to looking at other people's evidence. You don't have to accept it as proof, but be respectful of their evidence.
Well said, Kathy. And on that note, this has been another episode of Curious Explorers. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like, share, give us a follow, leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode all about orbs. Now, if you enjoyed it, please remember to like, share, and follow. It really does help us continue bringing great content to you. And of course, if you've listened to this on your audio-only streaming apps, please do consider checking out our YouTube channel at Curious Explorers Show, and that's Explorers plural. We'll always strive to post some sort of video footage, still images, or other things that bring the paranormal to life that much more.